Canadian Livestock Transport Program, also known as CLT, is a project under the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council. As of August 2020, the new and improved CLT online training platform was launched. The program has been restructured to offer training modules for livestock and poultry. CLT encourages collaboration with industry partners to explore and develop additional online training opportunities. To learn more about the program or to register for training, please visit www.livestocktransport.ca or contact Amy Wright, the CLT coordinator, with any comments or suggestions for the CLT program. Reach by phone at 403-879-4001 or by email at info@livestocktransport.ca.
The National Farm Animal Care Council is a collaborative partnership of diverse stakeholders created to share information and work together on farm animal care and welfare. NFAHW is an essential organization within Canada's animal welfare system with a uniquely Canadian approach. We address national animal care issues related to farmed animals with a primary focus on animals raised for the production of food for people. We are an organization of process, building credible processes that support diverse stakeholders in developing solutions to animal care challenges. Our ultimate goal is sustainable progress on farm animal welfare while maintaining the viability of Canadian animal agriculture. NFAHW does three things. We uphold a credible, science-informed approach for the development, update, and maintenance of codes of practice for the care and handling of farm animals. We uphold a standard, credible approach for the development of animal care assessment programs, and we facilitate information sharing and communication on farm animal care and welfare amongst diverse stakeholders. What makes NFAHW unique is the partnership between animal agriculture industry groups, animal welfare advocates, governments, scientists, veterinarians, and the food industry. The relationships cultivated among stakeholders that do not normally interact is one of our key strengths. NFAHW became a semi-autonomous division of the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council in April of 2020. While NFAHW's mandate will not change, this is an exciting opportunity to enhance animal welfare collaboration and synergies between the two organizations.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our second virtual event, Animal Welfare, A Vision for the Future. I'm going to give a few opening remarks in French, and our presentations will be in a mixture of French and English. So now would be a great time to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and designate which language you would like to hear things in if you have a preference. Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes, et bienvenue à notre deuxième événement virtuel.
Welcome to our second virtual event, which is called Animal Welfare, A Vision for the Future. I'm David Fraser. I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia here in Vancouver in the program on animal welfare. Now I'm going to continue in Shakespeare's language in order not to massacre Molière's language. D'abord, je voudrais remercier nos commanditaires, Metagam, et le commanditaire pour ce matin, Metagam, merci. On a aussi les commanditaires pour toute la série d'événements.
Our gold sponsors are the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and Farm Credit Canada. The silver sponsors are Egg Farmers of Canada, and our bronze sponsors, the Canadian Animal Health Institute, Chicken Farmers of Canada, the Registered Veterinary Technicians and Technologists of Canada, Agrilytics, and the National Sheep Network. Thank you to all our sponsors. We couldn't hold these events without your support. Today we have 4 speakers coming from a very wide range of backgrounds. plus a panel discussion at the end. And in order to keep lots of time for the panel discussion, I'm going to keep the introductory biographical details short. You have biographies in your accompanying package, and I won't simply rehearse those. Just to note that you can send questions at any time using the chat function, and they will be monitored in both French and English and relayed to us. Without further ado, our first speaker today is Dr. Marina von Keyserlingk. Nina is a professor also in the animal welfare program, also at the University of British Columbia, and she has the office next to mine in the unlikely event that we ever get to visit our offices sometime in the future. Just as a brief comment, Nina is an extremely accomplished scientist. In addition, she provides a very high level of leadership to a wide range of organizations in the agri-food sector. And it is in that context that we asked her to kick off our session today with a presentation called Working Toward Socially Sustainable Animal Agriculture. We're delighted to have Marina von Keyserlingk.
Mute there you go. When you gave me control, I have no buttons anymore, anywhere anymore. Anyhow, sorry. Thank you, David. So as David said, we're going to give a sort of 20-minute presentation. So I'm going to just roll into this. So I just want to start by saying that I've been giving an awful lot of thought for an awful long time about sort of where the future of animal agriculture is and where it's been, where it is now. And what I hope to do today is to get everybody to think a little bit about what is the vision that we see for our animal industries tomorrow. But I wanted to start with just a reminder that really animal agriculture is we do our businesses we are able to do what we do because we have what's called a social license. Society gives us that license to produce food. And one of the things I've been, thinking about this and reading some things, and I came across this statement in a journal that I would never normally read, but I just thought this sentence was something that I would just read out and get us to sort of keep in the back of our mind. To maintain a social license, it is incumbent that practices are in step with evolving community values. And to me, the take-home message is that we need to be open to change. So when we're maintaining our social license, what are the things that we need to think about? One of the things we do know is that we do have some disconnects happening. There is a growing criticism about some of the things that we do in agriculture. And for those of you that know me, know that I grew up in the heart of animal agriculture. My dad was a beef rancher. I can't tell you how often he said to me, Nina, I grew up in the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia. He said, just go and convince those people in the big city of Vancouver that everything I do is, I do it because I love my cows. And, so I grew up in the heart of that, in the heart of agriculture. But I also have very strong European roots. And I know, having been to Europe a number of times when I was in my 20s and hearing people ask questions about agriculture, it just started making me think a little bit. And, I want for my next sort of 20 minutes, I just want to go through some of the things that we in agriculture have talked about doing, and how do we convince the world that we're doing the right thing? Do we convince the world? What are some of the other options for us? So I'm going to talk about educating the public, some of the work that David and my other colleague Dan Weary and I have been doing in terms of engaging the public, and then really talk about some of the things that we've been doing in trying to think about where do we see the future? How does animal agriculture lead this process rather than just being reactionary? So one of the things that I want to start with is educating the public. like I said, my dad constantly told me that I had to educate everybody in Vancouver, that, you know, that what we were doing on the beef cattle ranch was fine. So Beth Ventura was a PhD student of ours, and she was really interested in this idea, because education really comes down to, if you give people information, they will be more knowledgeable, therefore more acceptable. And so she decided that she was going to try and test that. So she did a study where we call basically looking at, does learning about current dairy cattle care practices change perception? So the first thing, this is an open house day at our UBC dairy. We have about 800 people that come through the farm. And she took 50 of these individuals, and she obviously they were willing to participate in her study. The first thing that she did is she gave them a test, and she gave them really basic questions about dairy cattle care, such as, you know, does a cow have to have a calf in order to produce milk? It was sometimes a bit shocking that only about 28 of the 50 people got that question right. They had no idea, but these sort of five very basic questions. Before they went on the tour, on average, they got 3 of these 5 questions right. She then asked them, what are some of the concerns before they went on the tour that, you know, if you're thinking about the dairy industry, what are some of your concerns? So the things that they highlighted were, they were super, super worried about the feed. As Beth, I remember, once said to me, she goes, Nina, it's like they think we feed them nuclear waste or something. Many of them talked about the feed. Many of them talked about the fact that they hoped that cows were on pasture, but they were a bit worried that they weren't. Many of the 50 individuals talked about concerns around behavioral restriction. Probably not surprising, given a lot of the talk in the media about the pig industry and hens in cages, so there was concern about that. A number of them also spoke about abuse. Not surprising, this study was done about 4 months after the big undercover video case at Chilliwack Cattle in British Columbia, so that had been sort of front and center in the news. She then, before they went on this educational tour, she did ask them one last question, which was, how confident are you that dairy cattle have a good life? So of these 50 people, 42% said they were confident, 30% said they were neutral, and 28% said they were not confident. They then went on a tour. They were told about not new at that time, but NFAHW guide, the code of practice that had been put together. There was a whole poster on that, and that the industry was really trying to come up with ways of providing assurance. And they went through all of these, I think there was 8 different stations. They were shown where the maternity part of the barn was. They were told that cows have to have a calf in order to produce milk. They were told that the calf is separated and that it goes into the calf pen and it's reared there. And in our case, they're also group housed. So they were told that they had other calves that they were reared with, that because the cow went into the milk parlor, they were told about reproduction. They were told about the feed that the cows went. They were also told that the high producing cows did not have access to pasture. And so they went through this tour, and then afterwards, when they came out, she tested them again, and they went from 3 out of 5 questions correct to 4 out of 5. So we had, in theory, educated them. They were more knowledgeable about dairy practice. These are now, I'm just going to give you some quotes. So this is, in some cases, the perceptions improved after visiting the UBC dairy. Here is somebody that before the tour said, I'm concerned about humane treatment, cramped living conditions, access to grazing. This individual said afterwards, the animals seem well cared for. The practices on this farm seem very ethical. But not everybody thought that. Some perceptions worsened. Before, somebody said, I never had any concerns. And afterwards said, I would still prefer to see animals grazing in the fields, eating the grass, and calves not separated so quickly from their mothers. So the last thing she did was she asked them again, how confident are you that dairy cattle have a good life? So just to remind you, before there were 42% that were confident. If education truly does work, we should see an increase in confidence. And in actual fact, we lost confidence. The 42% went down to 24%, much higher in the neutral category. and a slight increase in the not confident. Overall, the participants were super pleased to see the high level of attention and care to the cattle. They talked about the feed. They talked about how loving the farmers and the students were with the cows, but they were absolutely displeased about certain practices that they had no idea about, including cow-calf separation and the lack of pasture and outdoor access. So educating the public, I don't think is going to work. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be transparent. I think one of the greatest risks to animal agriculture is the public finding out about practices that they had no idea about and then being shocked about it. But I think we need to do more is engage with the public. What things are important for them? And then I think, and then I'm going to end with leading the process. So, oops. So I'm just going to show you a quick, this is some work that we actually did in Brazil. And I show this often because this was done with people that were definitely had lower economic status than what we would normally often see here in Canada. And this comes back to, people's values. And in this study, what we did is we had, I think about 350 participants. They went into an online survey. We were talking about sow housing. They were told that in Brazil, there's two types of housing. There's individual housing and there's group housing of stalls. They were then given the opportunity to access videos. I would like to say the videos were chosen. These are all online, freely accessible on the internet, but they were chosen in conjunction with people working in the pig industry. Basically, we got their vote of approval, that they were reasonable. We didn't want to show anything that, showed any signs of abuse or anything like that. We wanted to show the best pictures forward. And then we asked them, in your opinion, how should pregnant sows be housed? Oh no, I should also add, we gave them reasons that are given often in support of individual housing. And then we also gave them reasons in support of group housing. And then we asked them, how should pregnant sows be housed? And what you can see here is there was much more support for the indoors in group housing than individual crates. I mean, this has been shown a number of times. However, what we also did is we gave them an out. We also gave them the option of in another system. We didn't describe what that system was. We just said something else. And what you can see is the majority of people chose in another system. So there is, the rejection of gestation stall housing by the public doesn't necessarily mean that they actually are supportive of the group housing. So I think we need to be careful and we need to titrate out what aspects they're really, even in group housing, that they still find uncomfortable. So lastly, just engaging with the public and leading the process. Because I think truly what's been happening so far is that so often we're placed in this reactionary position. Somebody criticizes us and then all of a sudden, we're just on the defensive, and then we just spill information and we tell the stories that we're proud of. We don't talk about what we're not proud of because we don't know how to talk about it. And I think instead of that, I think what we really need to do is we really need to sit down and we need to think of, develop a vision of the industry. And so we've been doing a lot of work in this area with different stakeholder groups. And we put them in a situation where, we can easily talk about what the challenges are today. But if your daughter or son is going to take over your chicken farm or your pig farm or your beef cattle ranch or your dairy industry, what does that farm need to look like 25 or 30 years from now that they don't have the same challenges that you are faced today? That they don't need to have a webinar about, how do we talk about all these things? So we've been doing a lot of focus groups. Focus groups are, I think, an ideal way to deal with this because they build relationships and create dialogue. You get different perspectives around the table. You can discuss and identify shared values. And David's done lots of work with early on is trying to understand sort of what are when we look at these animal industries, if you look at different stakeholder groups, why not start as a point of discussion? What do we agree on? And then and then talk about what comes after that. But also I think what we need to do that, but we also need to do, okay, what about the short term, the medium term, and like this 25 years from now? Because we need to develop a vision for the industry. And then we need to put in place the pieces that we need to, our goalposts that we need to strive for to try to attain that vision. What I'm talking about is strategic planning. You know, most professional organizations go through strategic planning sessions. I think many of us have probably we get frustrated with them because we're going through them all the time. But what they do is they make us reflect and they make us think forward. So we did this, and I'm just going to show you a bunch of word clouds now. And so this is a word cloud. We did this with Western Canadian dairy producers. These are 7 focus groups of 25 farmers. We put them in the situation where, you know, like I said, in 25 years, if your daughter, granddaughter, son, whoever is going to take over the farm, what are the things that are must have? And we got them to write on sticky notes a bunch of things that they were thinking about. The bigger the word, the more often it came up. So clearly these, and most of these, we did, I think 4 groups at the Western Canadian Dairy Seminar, and then we did another 3 groups in the Fraser Valley. The farmers were great. They were really engaged. A lot of the stuff was, you know, and then we had a discussion afterwards, and some of these words then became sort of unpacked these words. But in terms of the word cloud, cow comfort, hugely important for these dairy farmers. They saw the cow at the focus, and I think this really speaks to the commitment by farmers for animal welfare to try to give the cow a reasonably good life. All of these things, they recognize that they need to worry about her, management. And then there was a whole bunch of others. Economics was still in there, obviously. You know, how do you ever give a cow a good life if you're going broke? These sort of things. There was a lot of talk about education being, and this is some of the things that came out for us, is they also spoke about education as being super important. I think we need to unpack that. What does that mean, and is that going to be effective? We also did this with veterinarians. This is at the Ontario Association of Bovine Practitioner meeting. I had a great evening doing this with the vets. And what I've shown here is what because we did both the must-haves and the leave behind. So the things we don't want to worry about anymore. So the vets don't want to worry about cows. They don't want to worry about lameness. They talk about hormones. I think this speaks to, again, in the dairy industry, you know, the use of the hormones in terms of synchronization protocols to get cows pregnant. I think they see these things as being difficult conversations now, and also things that they don't want to have to deal with later. Interesting here, they talk about the tie stall being left behind. Bull calves. This has become a huge issue in Canada, the fate of the bull calf. Sort of, you know, this is an uncomfortable conversation for many people working in the dairy industry, because a lot of these animals are waste product. We have traditionally pushed them into, and especially in Ontario, a lot of them going into the veal industry. We have a Canadian public that doesn't want to eat veal. So what are these things? And so this type of work gives us an idea of some of the things that we really need to figure out. We also have done this with pigs. My colleague Dan and I were invited to speak at the Pig Welfare Symposium in Minneapolis in November of 2019. And we had about, I think, nearly 80% of about 50% of the participants participate in our focus groups. And so here, these were things and this is a mixed group. This would have some farmers, many people working in the pig industries, or genetics companies, food or slaughter companies, it was sort of a mixed bag of everybody interested in their business was the pig industry. And here what we have is an example of their must-haves. They see technology being huge in the future. And I think, you know, we know so much about how to track individual animals in larger herds, and they see training as being key. Welfare, huge, you know, recognition. I think there's a lot of the retailers in the room recognizing that welfare was going to play a bigger and bigger role down the road, and that needed ways to show that, you know, the welfare on their farms was at the standard that was acceptable to society. In terms of the leave behinds or the unattractive features, euthanasia, was a thing that they really didn't, can we create systems that we're no longer having to euthanize as many animals? The facilities here, they talked, I think this was from the discussions afterwards in the context of the gestation stalls, recognition that restriction of movement was something that was going to be tough to hold on to, disease, consumer education, the fact that we have to convince the consumer that we're doing the right thing. I thought was really interesting that they saw that they would like to leave that behind, that we end up with an industry that they just accept and say, okay, they trust that we're doing the right thing. We also talked to at the Pig Welfare Symposium, we got them to also articulate how do they achieve that vision. It was very clear, and we saw this in the dairy side of things as well as it was really articulated very well here, is they see this process being industry-led. They saw research as an important step in this. And I think research is, of course, I'm biased because this is what I am as a scientist, but research can tell us what the possibilities are. What we have to be careful is that it doesn't tell us what we ought to do. That's where the social license comes in. But it gives us examples or can derive solutions that ideally, hopefully work for the animal, work for the farmer, and work for society. There was lots of discussion about the openness to change and the fact that moving forward, we cannot be so rigid. We need to be more open-minded. We need to accept the fact that, some of the things that we did, maybe we shouldn't be doing anymore. I grew up on a cattle ranch. I can't tell you how many thousands of bull calves I castrated without pain mitigation. I was hopefully a good little girl. I did what my dad told me to do. Would I castrate a calf now without pain mitigation? Absolutely not. In part because large part because I've learned, science has shown me, and actually I've opened my eyes, this is a painful procedure. They saw increased engagement between consumers and the industry, the need to sit down and decide on what our values are. This is key moving forward. I think there's lots that they felt that, there's things that we can learn from other jurisdictions. So share industries, lessons learned with industry around the world. Many of the discussions that we are having in North America today, Europe had a decade ago. There was lots of talk about minimum standards and enforcement. And as an industry, what is that minimum standard? So my take-home points are one-way educational efforts are likely to fail. Sustained two-way engagement can help. It can help us identify those areas where society has concern, and we can then do science to help address those. Don't just respond to concerns, lead the process, develop a collective vision and a plan on how to achieve this. What are your must-haves for the future of your industry, and what must we leave behind? Thank you. And these are just the sponsors of the UBC Animal Welfare NSERC Industrial Research Chair. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much, Nina. What a wonderful presentation. Very solidly based on research and at the same time, integrative and inspirational. Thank you so much. We have time for a few questions for Nina, and I'm waiting to hear a feed from the people, the staff who are monitoring our, what do you call it? The chat function.
Hi, David. It's Megan. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Excellent. We have one question or a couple of questions coming in for Nina. The first one is, when you're referring to the focus groups that you mentioned, we are dealing with a kind of targeted, potentially biased audience because they're those that are willing to participate in such groups. What about those that won't trust any message in favor of the livestock industry if they sense it may be coming from someone that's even remotely related to it?
So I think if I understood you correctly, so if you're talking to somebody who's just inherently, is already set in stone about their views of what the animal agriculture industry, everybody's entitled to their position. And I don't mean to cop out about, if you can have a conversation, great. They have the decision to not accept that information, turn around and walk away. I think what animal agriculture needs to do more so is talk to the thoughtful person on the street. we have not, we know what our huge critics out there think. They are very good at publicizing their message. But what about the people that are the thoughtful person on the street who, the majority of Canada? We spend very, very little time engaging with them, other than we put pictures on our advertisements, all of these things, so it's a one-way educational effort. We need to spend more time talking to them, because they're the ones that are going to be your future customers, or your current customers and your future customers.
Thanks,
and that's,
Nina.
I think, what we've been trying to do.
Great, thank you, Nina. We do have another question for you. How do you think we should balance public ideas of what should happen with farmed animals and the welfare implications and realities associated with making those changes in the industry? For example, outdoor access for dairy cattle. In my experience as a bovine practitioner, I have seen better cow comfort and welfare for animals that have been managed in a well-managed free stall than many of the stall barns with outdoor access.
Great question. So I think, to me, what we need to do is, so let me take that apart in two parts. Of course, if we don't do anything and we continue to drive for, which is what's been happening in Canada, is these zero grazing systems, and many of them argue for the reasons that you just said, because we can have great cow comfort, we're able to formulate their diet properly, we can do all these things. So, okay, we can do that. The public, however, if you ask them to give a vision of the ideal dairy farm, that is not what they describe. They describe cows on pasture. So the third part of this is, what does the cow want? And we actually have done a lot of research on this to show that, the cow, for the most part, she likes being indoors during the day, but when she's given a choice, especially on warm summer nights, she's almost always outside. Now the issue is, in Vancouver or the Lower Mainland, in even now, the middle of November, if you put cows on pasture, you're going to destroy it, okay? So we've been doing work on other alternative things of outdoor access. So I think one of the things that we need to do is we also need to figure out a system that works for the cows, works for the farmers, doesn't hopefully, well, no, better said, reduces lameness, because that is one of the arguments that I would have, one of the challenges we have in Canada with our zero grazing systems is we're not getting lameness under control. So, and if you put cows on pasture, we can show that we can reduce lameness. So it depends on what you're looking at in terms of the benefits of each of these systems. However, we need to work on developing these systems, and then we need to go back to the public and titrate it out. So, for instance, if I show a picture of a cow on a bedded pack outdoors, and she's lying down chewing her cud, what kind of reaction do I get? I don't think we need to find systems where the public gives us a red ribbon and says this is perfect. We just need a system that they go, okay, that looks good. Those are two very. I see a cow in a free stall and she's standing in manure, that they get this negative visceral reaction.
Good. Thank you very much, Nina, for a thought-provoking presentation and for reminding us in your answers that these are complicated issues that involve animals and farmers and the public and perceptions, all of which have to be taken into account. Our next speaker is Dr. Andrea Jones-Bitton, a faculty member at the Ontario Veterinary College and Director of Wellbeing Programming at the college. Andrea has done world-leading research in the area of the well-being of veterinarians and farmers, and her work reminds us how closely the welfare of animals and the welfare of the people who deal with them are related. We're really delighted to have her speak to us today on campaigns against agriculture, and are these a risk factor for poor farmer mental health and poor animal welfare? Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here today to speak about all of these issues and again try to get us all on the same page. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of a background before I jump into things. So faced with a lot of anecdotal evidence, but a lack of statistics, my team and I set out to investigate farmer mental health in Canada via a national survey in 2015 and 2016. In the end, we had about 1,100 farmers from across all commodities across Canada, and we used standardized, validated psychometric tools to investigate these mental health outcomes. It is important to note that these are not diagnostic tools. A mental illness does need to be diagnosed by a health professional, but they are screening tools that can highlight a concern. And we found 45% of our participating producers had high levels of stress. Nearly 60% were classified as anxiety caseness. There was a high potential for burnout amongst participating farmers. And we also had low levels of resilience. And resilience is a state of being that promotes wellness and helps us bounce back from adversity. And so, as has been observed in other parts of the world, our farmers experience higher levels of mental stress and distress than other occupations. And farmers are also at risk of increased risk of death by suicide. In a recent systematic review and meta-analysis, they reported an excess risk of suicide amongst farmers and people working in forestry and fishery. So to better understand the realities facing Canadian farmers, our team conducted a series of 75 one-on-one interviews with farmers and people who work with farmers. And we sought to explore the lived realities of mental health on farm, including the perceived stressors and help-seeking behaviors. And I'm just on the wrong slide here. There seems to be a bit of a delay. So these interviews were audio recorded and transcribed verbatim, and our team analyzed the transcripts using thematic analyses. And in some instances, today I've also added to the interview data here with verbal and written communications with farmers, as well as from a social media scan. Particularly given that we're talking about animal welfare, I just want to point out that the shrieking cat noises you may be hearing in the back are my kittens playing. And no animals are being harmed in the delivery of this presentation. The joys of working from home. And so the farming stressors that were reported, we know that farming, the World Health Organization indicates that it's one of the most stressful occupations in the world. And farmers experience a wide range of occupational stressors, most of which are beyond their control. And that's really important to note because we humans, we like to have that sense of control. When we don't, we get a feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, and that sets us up for mental illness. And as a result, we do see elevated levels of mental illness and suicide in farmers here in Canada and elsewhere in the world. So this was a word cloud that was created with farmers' responses to an open-ended question regarding the occupational stressors that they face. And again, the size of the word is proportional to how often that response was given. And so many of the stressors that you see here are ones that are traditionally associated with farming. We see finances, changing markets, weather, isolation, just to name a few. But relatively newer stressors, however, are those related to activism and campaigns against agriculture, things like public opinion. And I'm sorry, there is a delay here. And indeed, activism and an unfair sense of public scrutiny are increasingly being reported by our farmers. And it's unsurprising that farmers describe the use of misleading information as a source of frustration. So if you consider some of these ads, all of which are based on complete lies. So we have, here's the rest of your wool coat. Never has wool been produced this way. Has your child got autism? Learn about the link between dairy and autism. We see things like 1 minute reality of reality factory farming, cow's milk being filled with pus, blood, hormones, antibiotics, etc. And again, PETA was particularly against the wool. We see other very graphic things like this. Now, I realize that these ads are from the more extreme groups, but these are also the ones that receive a lot of public attention. And I'd encourage the less extreme organizations to be cognizant of the fairness of their messaging, as these will also be impactful on farmers. So unfair feelings of public scrutiny, of being vilified, these were surprisingly common discussion points amongst our farmers. And there's a growing sense of public scrutiny. And the feeling is that it's often from people who are not likely well informed about agriculture, or again, are being intentionally misleading. So farmers discussed mistrust, vilification, and a spread of lies and as personal attacks. They shared quotes like these: "I've been called a shill, a murderer, a rapist. I've been called a piece of shit. I go into the city and I've been called all kinds of stuff at markets. I've been called baby killers." And other farmers, they've been told that they're raping their animals because they breed them for milk. Tweets like these ones that you see here are common to find in ag Twitter. We've heard stories of farm families who are experiencing the devastation of a barn fire and having protesters in their laneway calling them murderers while they are dealing with that tragedy. We've heard stories of farmers being goaded and provoked for a response. One farmer told us about how his name, his photo, and his farm location, which is also his home, was shared amongst an animal activist organization's global networks for target. And so what our farmers are describing is that feelings that the public doesn't trust them, doesn't trust the food that they produce, or that the service that they provide. For example, one said, "We have all these urbanites who are convinced that we're poisoning the public and raping nature by farming, you know?" Another said, "We have a population that is scared of their food. They do not trust that it comes from somewhere safe. They do not trust that it's safe for the environment." And this in turn leads to farmers feeling vilified and feeling personally attacked. As one said, "Now we're being observed all the time by somebody who doesn't even understand what we do." And in particular, where animal care was involved, these attacks were described as personal attacks on the farmer's dignity and honor. So for example, one farmer talking about his animals said, "I mean, it's still something you care about. You feel like you have, it's like an honor system almost, right? You have a duty to keep them as healthy as you can." And farmers, they care about their animals and they have an honor system in keeping them healthy. An attack saying that farmers do not care for their animals or raise them well is an attack on their honor. Added to these stressors is the issue of animal activism and recent reports of on-farm excursions and trespassing. In multiple countries around the world, we're seeing reports of activist attacks, including organized break-and-enters on farms. And this serves to further compound the many stresses that farmers are already experiencing, and has added new stresses related to the health and safety of their animals, their families, and their children. So for example, one participant shared, "Yeah, it's frustrating from the work perspective for that kind of thing, right? Because I have to go around to my guys and say, is your barn locked? Is there any strangers on the property?" and that kind of stuff. And they're pretty conscious and they have families too, right? There's children and pets in the yard. And it's a whole nother level of stress because you never quite know when it's going to happen, and you never know what's going to come up, and you never kind of, even Facebook, it's like, who's going to say something next? I just don't need this. With everything going on, I just don't need this. Another shared, "It's emotional. Farmers are frustrated and they're scared. We have to lock up our barns now because we're afraid of people coming into our barns and doing things to our animals." So our farmers are now feeling a strong sense of having to be on guard on top of all of the other things that they're already dealing with. And so all of this, all of the traditional stresses that farmers are experiencing, plus this distrust, this scrutiny, this vilification, this misleading information, was summed up as a major source of stress and frustration for our farmers. And these attacks, they aren't just attacks on someone's job, right? They're attacks on who the farmers are. It's their lifestyle, their family history, their culture, their identity. As these two farmers shared on social media, this one by Cam Hool has become quite famous now, I figured it out. Farming is the art of losing money while working 400 hours a month, feeding people that think you're trying to kill them. John Kolowalczyk says, instead of thank a farmer, which seems very self-serving, how about we start promoting trust a farmer? I'd much rather be trusted than thanked. We all need meaning and purpose in life, to feel like there's a reason that we're here and that we're contributing to our society and contributing to the world. And these attacks strip farmers of that. And so all of these many stresses take a toll on farmers. And farmers describe this scrutiny and vilification that they're experiencing as unfair, and that they're left to defend themselves. As one participant said, if you don't view your work in society as being of value to someone else, you really question, why are you doing it for them? It's an attack against farmers, but farmers are not being defended. They need to defend themselves. And others said, I think we need to elevate farmers as a whole and let them know that they're being supported and not vilify them. I think as a society, we could do a much better job of taking care of the people who are trying to feed us. And I think that would go a long way. Farmers experience a wide range of stressors, and our data have shown that this is having an impact on their health. And just we'll hear quotes from open-ended in our national survey. Pulled in multiple directions, unable to maintain work-life balance, exhausted, but unable to take a break. The main stress in my life, feeling ignored and marginalized, government and our society. What makes me the most upset is I have everything I've ever dreamed of: love, family, and a farm. And all I feel is overwhelmed, out of control, and sad. I'm destroying myself to make sure others are cared for. I just try to keep plugging along into death. And it's a wonder we don't off ourselves more often. Many farmers in Canadian agriculture are struggling in terms of their mental health, even if they're not talking about it. They face high occupational stresses, most of which are beyond their control. Again, that leads to helplessness, hopelessness, and sets them up for mental illness. Our farmers also have low resilience, which makes them more susceptible to the effects of chronic stress, like physical illness, poor quality of life, depression, anxiety, and suicide. So some of you might be thinking now, but wait a second, I thought we were here to talk about animal welfare. And I would argue, as I know many on the call would as well, that it's not just about animal welfare, it's about one welfare, because human and animal health and well-being are connected. We know that farmer well-being impacts animal well-being. Some of the work that's been done in other countries has looked at this, and in Finland, farmers considered animal welfare and their own welfare as being dependent on each other. And that taking care of the farmer's own well-being scored the most important way to improve animal welfare, but was also the most difficult action to put into practice. If farmers are struggling with their own well-being and motivation, they will find it very difficult to invest in improving animal welfare. Because when we are mentally unwell, it is hard to care for ourselves, let alone to care for others, even when those others are important to us. Studies out of Ireland have reported that animal welfare and animal neglect cases are associated with mental health, addiction, and social problems amongst the farmers who care for them. Similarly, research out of Denmark reported financial and psychiatric problems as being associated with animal neglect convictions. And the farmers with those convictions reported preceding financial trouble, technological breakdown, family problems, and stress. And I get it. When animal neglect is reported in the media, I often hear people talking about it like this: I just don't understand how anyone could do that. just leave their animals like that. And this quote's actually from one of our research participants. And I think out of lack of understanding of the impacts of poor mental health, it becomes easy to think of these farmers as evil or lazy. But what we actually see is that it's oftentimes a slippery slope, starting with minor changes that accumulate over time. Consider this description by a veterinarian who had worked with a client for over a decade. The farmer had generally seemed down, but the vet saw a slow decline over weeks and months of knowing him. And this participant veterinarian said, I saw changes on the farm that it became evident to me that, okay, this is not his normal way of being. He would just do the bare minimum. He just couldn't cope. It became too overwhelming to do a good job. And it impacts the animals because they don't get the care that they should have. And whether that's just they don't get clean, dry bedding that day, or maybe they don't get fed that day. And the whole farm just gets run down. Pens don't get cleaned out. You don't pay your bills. You don't do any of the things that would normally be routine little things. And then it got to be the point that, well, this is too big of a job for me to do in one day, and so I can't do anymore. And it would just slide from there. So mental health, social problems, consequences of chronic stress, this can interrupt our day-to-day functioning, and they can disrupt the day-to-day farming practices, sometimes to the point of becoming unmanageable, which in turn increases the risk to farm animal welfare standards. And so in many cases, it isn't that farmers don't care about their animals or that they don't want to do a good job. In cases of abuse, it's often that they can't do a good job. And farmers' historical culture, how many of them were raised, is that asking for help is not okay. And so perhaps they don't ask for help. In many cases, poor animal health and welfare is related to poor farmer mental health and welfare. So it's one welfare. And so what do I think we need? I think we need to act compassionately with everyone involved. Human and animal well-being are linked, caring for the person whilst also caring for animal welfare standards. We need to protect animal welfare and remember that there are human beings involved, and that human being is likely struggling. We also need to care about the person as well as the animal. And so, for example, a veterinary participant in the Devitt et al. Study shared, you can go in and just be ruthless, but that certainly achieves very little improvement in the human situation you're dealing with, which many times is equally as serious as the animal situation. A participant in our own research said, the thing that we forget about is when we see somebody not doing a good job looking after the animals, we think we'll just teach them how they should be doing a good job and show them what they're missing, and that would make things better. But the reality is they already know what they should be doing. There's something that's preventing them from doing it. And so what do I think acting compassionately will involve? A standardized practice to investigate cases is likely difficult. An individualized process is going to be required, and that's going to require mental health literacy and empathy. I think we would also benefit from ethical decision-making and training in ethical decision-making, like Dr. Fraser's practical ethic. In a Fawcett et al. Paper, they applied Dr. Fraser's practical ethic in veterinary practice and looked at its compatibility within a one welfare framework, and there are some great ideas in there. Early warning systems in Ireland, farmers, government, the Irish Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and health services, they all work together to identify welfare problems before they become critical, to recognize at-risk cases, including signs of human self-neglect and animal neglect. And then in terms of media, I think there's considerable stigma around farm animal neglect, which Devitt et al. Describe as being, quote, compounded by a lack of sensitivity in the media about how such cases of neglect are reported. So I think we need greater sensitivity around reporting so as to decrease the fear of stigma around farmers accessing supports. And so all of this to say that I think we need to prioritize the support of farmer mental health and well-being. As a farmer in the Devitt et al. Paper said, I felt there was more for their animals than there was for me. I felt that there was nothing for my welfare. And we've heard that from our participants often, that there's lots in place for animal welfare and nothing there for farmer welfare. And so all of this is, to me, begs the question, might campaigns against agriculture actually run counter to the goals of animal welfare organizations and animal activists? Poor mental health may contribute to decreased productivity and reduced attention to animal health and welfare. And so helping farmers build their mental health and resilience is important to animal welfare. So I'll just quickly say this is the Yerkes-Dodson graph. We see as increasing stress, we can measure this against performance. We don't actually want too little stress. That's actually a bad thing. It leads to us being bored and inactive. We got low performance. We'd like to be somewhere here in this middle zone where we've got an ideal amount of stress that serves to energize us, focus us, motivate us. We see that's associated with optimal performance. Unfortunately, our results are showing that too many of our farmers are living out here in this orange zone or potentially even red zone, where we see high levels of stress associated with fatigue, exhaustion, panic, anxiety, anger, possibly burnout. That's associated with low performance. So again, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to motivate farmers living out here on this end of the zone to make investments in animal welfare. And so all to say, I think we need to support farmer mental health and well-being. We need a national strategy for farmer mental health in Canada. We need to provide farmers with better access to support, teleservices like we're seeing in COVID-19. That's been one silver lining of this pandemic. We need industry social workers. We need relief work so farmers can actually know that their animals and their farms are in good stead while they're getting the help that they need. And we need to build relationships. Their relationships have broken down. There are sides. Farmers don't feel they can trust anybody who's got an animal welfare agenda because of all of these tensions that have started. I think we need to build farmers into the discussion. We need to rebuild that trust between stakeholders and again, work together because it's by having those different actors in agriculture that we can find ways to help farmers under pressure. And I think that's great that we're all here to do that today. And so I just wanted to, again, say that we need animal health and welfare systems that recognize one welfare. And thank you for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for a very action-packed, well-informed, informative presentation, and reminding us of the important human dimension in animal welfare that I think we so often, too often forget. Interestingly, at a previous forum, we had a wonderful presentation by a Quebec participant who described the work being done there to support mental health in the farm population. We don't have time for questions specifically for Andrea now, but all the questions that we don't have time for at the end of each talk, we'll keep track of those and hope to raise them at during the panel discussion at the end. So please do submit your questions for Andrea and we'll track them. The next presentation is going to be given in French language. So those who want to hear the English translation, this would be a good time to go down to the interpretation button and click it appropriately. Alors, notre troisième conférencier sera René Roy.
So our third speaker will be René Roy. He's a pork producer, a dairy farmer, and a maple syrup producer. He also has a doctorate in economic agriculture, and he plays a very important role in the sector. And as the co-chair of our council, he is a colleague who is very precious. So thank you very much, René.
Merci, David. Donc, aujourd'hui, je vais...
So today, I will be introducing the producer's perspective in the field of pork and dairy the perspectives on advancing animal welfare and the importance of farmer mental health. In my discussion, in my presentation rather, I will be referring to irritants, and I would like to add that I intend improving the well-being of producers, and I shall be presenting constructive solutions in order to find the right way to proceed. Let me introduce myself. I should start by telling you what kind of farm business I own, but we sometimes forget that there are human beings in this business. So I am married, I am a husband, I have 6 children, I am a father, a son, a brother, a friend, and I like to interact with those who work in the same business. I am making this presentation so that we highlight the fact that we farmers are entrepreneurs, we are business operators, and I believe it is important for us to say that we are business operators. I will give you a few words on our family business. So my brother and myself own this family business that has been operating for more than 1 generation, and it produces various species. We have maple trees, but I won't talk about this today because we're referring only to animal health. But sometimes we take a walk in the forest and we really enjoy it. So the business we own, well, I must add that I have a PhD in agricultural economics, which enlightens my vision on animal health. I was involved in my industry, and I try to share my knowledge and my experience with those I work with. I am involved at the NFAHWC, as well as the Canadian Pork Council, and I am a chair of one welfare committee of the council, and we wanted to work on mental health, and we are suggesting solutions in order to avoid unpleasant circumstances. What is the perspective of a producer with regards to animal welfare? And let's not forget that the animals we take care of are, in fact, very important for us. So I can count on a team of veterinarians and agronomists who are themselves expert in health animals. So we are a team with real expertise in the field of animal health. Of course, farmers are the first interested in the health and welfare of animals. And I know that we have to take this into account. Humans are also included in the animal category. We must also think of a human, and we have to ask citizens what they think. I believe it is important to come to a balance between what the society wants and what farmers are willing to accept. I am not referring to financial resources only, but to human capacities. When a new regulation is being implemented, we have to put them into practice. As David Taylor said last year during the first conference, society has to be patient so that we can implement new practices. As you can see, there are two images below. And of course, we have to ask ourselves what society requires from its farmers compared to what it is willing to accept. So we have to question ourselves with a smile on our lips. Let's talk about the frustrations as well as the negative impacts that stem from this conclusion. First of all, it is difficult to see the limits that are always growing. Of course, we have to take into account the never-ending demand from society without support. Therefore, it has to be based on animal health, and there has to be a long-term planning process. We can't follow all trends on a short term. Industry has to adapt to those new regulations as well as new regulations. Rules and regulations can be disconnected from other consideration, such as sometimes innovation, diversity, and resilience. We have to think about commercial exchanges because sometimes our opportunities are being lowered. It is important that we take this into account when we choose practices, because otherwise we will be getting products from other countries not respecting the rules we have set. As you can see, my economist personality, of course, this is only one part of the equation. I don't believe we should complain about this, but we should implement regulations in the field of animal welfare, whether it is related to environment, zoning, as well as creating wealth. This has to be taken into account when one wants to implement animal welfare practices that have to be taken into consideration. Of course, there are many forms to fill, and sometimes some demands from society have counterproductive impacts. All the forms, documents, and procedures, as well as more, because those forms require an expertise. And if this is not taken into consideration, we might risk not fulfilling our objectives. If there is no balance, we have to acknowledge that producers might lose their motivation. Such as Andrea was saying earlier, they have to take care of their animals, but they won't be able to because they will feel that they have no more power. What brings me to talk about animal welfare that considers human welfare? There has to be a balance, as you can see, the scale on the right side. How can we balance everything? Always keep in mind that producers are human beings first and has only 24 hours a day. Although the farmer has a lot of energy, it has a family life and has to be in good health physically as well as mentally. In Canada, we have the advantage of following codes of practices that help us to inform producers as well as society about expected animal husbandry practices and must be based on facts. However, it has to be modulated with objective data, and we have to take into account the fact that certifications must also bring added value to the product or should be compensated. Those certifications have to be financially compensated because it could jeopardize the sector that has a lot of potential and lots of goodwill. It can come from the market, but also from society through government assistance programs. I believe that it has to be taken into account more and more when we set up requirements. Otherwise, we might lose high quality businesses that are not being fulfilled. We should not set aside innovation, diversity, as well as resilience that must survive rules and regulations. We have to implement those requirements, but we have to be flexible, and we shouldn't be afraid to change a law. And nowadays with COVID-19, we acknowledge with the meat transformation sector, we have to take into account the resilience of our food production. It has to be part of our consideration in order to avoid what is going on elsewhere, where we have taken measures to reduce the slaughtering of certain farm animals. That is all I had to say. I am very happy, David, and I am willing to answer the questions you might ask me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee. So the perspective of a very perspicacious producer. Merci René donc de votre présentation très perspicace. On avait quelques minutes pour quelques questions pour René avant de continuer. Alors j'attends vos questions. I have two questions in French for René. René, one of my questions is, could you give us some example of society's demands that are counterproductive? Yes. I'll give you one example about some social demands, forms that we have to fill out twice, coming from two different agencies, whether it be revenue or in terms of the environment. And I'll give you one very, very concrete example of what I experienced on our farm several years ago. We had a way of producing pork, which was different. It was not that popular at the time. We used materials for bedding. And when we got to the permissions, it was very difficult because the whole sector, the ministry sector of the environment, didn't know how to calculate the fertilizing load in pork production that was using that material for bedding. And so we went through years to try to use this product in the pork production. And we said that the animals were more comfortable with this litter, but we had to, go against what was natural and best for us because of all this period before the ministry became aware of, the benefits of it. All right, a second question. When it's a matter of putting in place new measures for animal welfare that have a financial impact, is there a difference for you as a producer under supply management and those who are not under supply management? Yes, there is. In an industry that is under supply management, there's a possibility of including costs of production within the supply management, the model of cost of production in supply management. Now, in the case of pork production, which is for export, the value of the pork is determined by the supply and demand at the world level. So there are the requirements of other countries in health and welfare of animals, and they're not necessarily the same as those that we have in Canada. And therefore, it's difficult to be able to divide the costs over the entire chain of production, including the customer. So the producer will the consumer will have a tendency to choose a product that's not as costly without knowing the requirements in animal welfare that are behind those prices. So that's a very unfortunate reality, but that we are facing.
Thank you very much, Renee.
Merci beaucoup, René. Si vous avez d'autres questions, continuez à les soumettre et nous allons essayer de...
Let me say, your answer to the last question could only have been given by a producer who also has a PhD in agricultural economics. Very astute. Thank you. Our final presenter today is Barbara Cartwright. Barbara is the Chief Executive Officer of Humane Canada, which is the Federation of Humane Societies and SPCAs across the country. Barbara has many career accomplishments, and it would be tempting to recite them here and now, but let me just instead make a personal comment. I have worked directly with Humane Canada, formerly called Canadian Federation of Humane Societies, and its leadership over the past 40 years, and I have never until Barbara's time seen such dynamic, progressive, big picture strategic thinking given to the organization as what she brings. So it's really a delight for us today to have Barbara to talk to us on the subject of One Welfare Future Forward.
Thank you, David. I'm very honored by that introduction, and I appreciate your comments about myself and about Humane Canada, and was very honored when I received your email asking me to speak at this particular forum with these esteemed colleagues that I have the chance to explore the concepts of what is our future forward and what is our vision for a strong and healthy agricultural sector. I also was very honored to speak about how do we build those alliances and those collaborations that are going to be required, that are required now in order for us to move forward and live into that vision. We are the Federation of Humane Societies and SPCAs, and we changed our name 3 years ago to Humane Canada to really lead with our vision, lead forward with what we want to see, which is a Humane Canada. A little bit about our members, we represent humane societies and SPCAs across the country. We have been engaged in this work for more than 30 years. We are one of the founders of Canada's Codes of Practice back in the 80s, and certainly one of the architects around the table of the National Farm Animal Care Council. And there's many reasons why we do this work. And one of the things to think about when you wonder why we're engaged in the work is because 30% of our members actually enforce the law. And so having good, strong standards of practice make that more possible in order to enforce the law. And so, again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. My presentation won't be long. It's been really great listening to all my colleagues speak about their different perspectives, and I'll try to wrap some of their ideas into mine. But I think I'm trying to make my slides go forward. Sorry about that. I think I'm having some technical difficulties. I'll try this. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I wanted to start by talking about this word that we've been using, the idea of vision. And what does vision mean when we want to look out and make change? And of course, vision and vision frameworks have been around with us for a very long time, and they're very useful to actually lay bare that framework when we start to enter into big conversations, really longitudinal change conversations about where do we want to go. And we would have had this visioning conversation, I'm sure, 30 years ago when we launched Canada's Codes of Practice with regards to on-farm animal welfare. Certainly, I wish I'd been around the table back in the early 2000s when those stakeholders came together, and most definitely discussed at that time what is a vision for the National Farm Animal Care Council. And we need to have that conversation again, and we need to bring together all the different perspectives that might need to be considered. And while we don't have that vision right now, and we're calling upon ourselves as leaders to come together and have that conversation, most certainly based on the information that we've seen here today and that we've been seeing building over the last decade, that vision will involve one health, one welfare framework. And while vision tells us where we want to go, for Humane Canada, for example, the idea of one welfare and being able to consider animal welfare, human welfare, and environmental welfare together, along with the health of our entire ecosystem, is incredibly important, as it is important to integrate animal welfare organizations and animal protection along with human protection and environmental protection, so that we can seek to find that strong agricultural system that's going to meet the needs of everyone involved in the system. But vision doesn't just tell us where we want to go, it also, forgive me, I'm sorry, my slides are not advancing, and I don't know if there's there we go, there's one. I guess they're coming along very slowly. A vision also can help us really determine, And now they're going too far ahead. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to go back. Maybe because for whatever reason, it's not going by my mouse. And now it's going, yeah, would you take control back? One of the great things, if you've ever been at a conference with me, is I always have technical difficulties. I don't know if it's the energy in my system or what, but I'm not even controlling it now. Maybe that's better. That's fine. We can leave it right here. And I'm getting some feedback to speak up louder as well. So I'm going to do that. And I've brought you all closer to me. So vision not only tells us where we want to go, but it also helps set up something called creative tension, because it creates the gap between our vision and our current reality. And we've heard a lot today about our current reality. And certainly we concur that while we've made some really important progress, particularly with Canada's codes of practice and bringing multiple stakeholders around a table to discuss this very issue about what is our vision for animal agriculture, we've actually seen in recent days and recent months an erosion of trust, increasing polarization, increasing frustration and acrimony, and reduced transparency, which is so critical in order to build the collaboration and the relationships that we need in order to move together through creative tension into our vision. I would also say that it's at this time that we see a lot of that tension and that frustration. It's coming from outside, and we've heard some of the issues around farmers feeling a reduced mental health, possibly different tactics being used in order to gain attention on issues. But it's also coming from the fact that we're being called upon in the process right now around the NFAHW table, for example. Many of our codes are starting to come to their 5-year review, their 10-year review. And so we're now having to go back into conversation about what's next. And that can be a very difficult time. You can advance the slide, please. And so in order to go into those conversations, to have those difficult conversations, I was asked about collaboration and what fosters collaboration, and certainly knowing who's at the table with you and being clear about what our intentions are and what other stakeholders' intentions are is critical in order to drive the collaboration that we need. And so I just wanted to share a little bit with you all about who Humane Canada is. We have been giving a lot of thought in recent years to what does it mean to have a Humane Canada? It's a big thing to change your name to your vision and then live into your vision. And what we realized is we don't have anything set up that says this is what a Humane Canada is. This is where we are today. So our vision and our current reality. And then how are we as an entire sector going to get there? And so I'm not going to read through these quotes. You can read them through as I talk with regards to what humaneness means and what does it mean to have a Humane Canada if you were a farm animal. And over the last 3 years, we've engaged with about 80 to 85 experts across the country to ask them this question as well. And what we did was create out of that a real model of what a Humane Canada would look like. We put together 7 keystones of a Humane Canada. We looked at what the enabling conditions would be for each of those keystones. And then we chose some animal welfare indicators that we could measure year over year in order to see if we are moving forward towards a Humane Canada. And in asking that question about what constitutes a Humane Canada, for us, and when we're at the table and when we're having these big conversations about animal agriculture and how it fits in and where it needs to go, for us, you can think about it as, for us, a humane country, and I'm going to read this directly out of the report. In a humane country, there is an understanding that animals have a life worth living and that they are recognized as sentient beings by a society that embraces its responsibilities with regards to their interests. This is expressed in a legal framework for animals, which determines the lawful interactions with animals with respect to animals who are kept and used for human purposes, such as companion animals, farm animals, animals in science, working dogs. Lawful use means that standards of care for those animals are applied that ensure good welfare and allow the animals options so that they have some agencies to choose positive, effective states. As well, ethical considerations are used to guide decision-making about animal use. When we come to the table, and you can advance the slide for me, please. When we come to the table, we all come with different perspectives and different ideas. We've seen them in these presentations, and we have to enter into a negotiation and a conflict management process. You can advance both the slides, thank you. And I wanted to have a word about that because it is challenging, it's difficult. It is particularly difficult when you think about it in light of what Andrea was talking about around farmers having reduced mental health, having increased suicide ideation with all of the different pressures and stresses on them. I was reflecting on, that's interesting, in our sector, in the animal welfare worker sector, 1 in 6 animal welfare workers have admitted to suicide thoughts, suicide ideation. I know in veterinarians, there's a high incidence of suicide as well. And so this I don't have an answer for, but it strikes me that if vets, farmers, animal welfare workers are all undergoing very similar stresses, that first of all, we need to think about why that is, because we're all intersecting with animals. And second, thinking about the negotiation table, how challenging it is to come to negotiation if we lack communication, we lack understanding about each other, and we're all exhausted, we're all disillusioned, and we're all really challenged. And so that's where vision becomes even more important, because we need to have that vision out in front of us so that we can remember where we need to go when the conversations get really challenging. And the uniqueness of the National Farm Animal Care Council, and why I'm such a big supporter of that process, is that it creates a space where we can have those messy conversations, and where those messy conversations can be facilitated and we can work through till we get to an answer. And because it's based on consensus, we have to work together to find an answer. And that's a really important part to creating the collaboration and the alliances, because each of the alliances and the stakeholders at the table feel like they actually have a stake in the conversation, and no one stakeholder is going to steamroll any other stakeholders. And it's hard. And right now, there's a feeling that we're moving towards intractability and maybe even towards destruction, because we're seeing less and less communication across the stakeholders. And we're seeing an increase in talking to our echo chambers, which of course social media feeds our echo chambers beautifully, right? It gives us a place to go back and feel like, huh, see, I was right. We all agree, it's okay. But it doesn't lend itself to the vision that we want to get to around the next phase for animal agriculture in Canada. And this brings me to my next slide, a word about the table and social license, which has been brought up here today. And so I'm not going to define social licensing, but I wanted to talk about the different people or the different stakeholders, I guess I should say, at the table. And from an animal welfare perspective, we often find that animals get lost at that table, even though we're there to discuss animal agriculture. And so how do we keep animals at the table? One of the parts of our animal welfare indicators is one of those keystones is the idea of representation, and that in a humane Canada, animals' interests are taken into account in decisions about actions that have an impact on them. And so we're going to be thinking from that perspective about animals and then about the public. Today we've talked about the mounting frustration and the difference and the divide between what some publics are demanding and what farmers are able to provide. And in between that is the animals themselves and also the government that can enable this whole system to work really, really well. With social license as well, you can see in this diagram that we're coming around the table to discuss social license, but of course, each of those stakeholders bring social license with them and can risk social license in being at that table. And so how do we even recognize everything that comes from behind us when we come and sit at that table that can either enable or disable motion forward toward the vision? And then can you advance the slide one more time, please? And so in pulling this all together and recognizing that it really is time for us as leaders to come back together and think about the vision, cast the vision, agree upon a shared vision for animal agriculture in the future. What are we going to work to now? We need to recognize that we're in this challenging time. We have some definite threats, but we have a path forward. And that path forward to me is the National Farm Animal Care Council, and that ensuring that that organization is operating well and well resourced, and not resourced on an annual basis. I would call upon anyone on the phone right now or on Zoom right now that's from the government to really look at how to provide long-term funding for the National Farm Animal Care Council so that they can grow. We need to make sure that there's more and more expertise being installed into the National Farm Animal Care Council, because we've seen recently that negotiations can become challenging, and without really deft facilitation, it can go off the rails. And so let's invest in the National Farm Animal Care Council. It's good for social license. It's good for social license for all of us. A word about ag-gag. Ag-gag definitely threatens social license. It threatens social license for all of us. And from our perspective, it's a path toward increased acrimony and frustration, which we see can actually break down our abilities to work together. We want to move towards more transparency. We want to see more accountability. We don't want to see more farmers suffering from mental health and suicide ideation. We don't want to see farmers being afraid that someone's going to come onto their farm and harm them or harm their animals. And so shifting to a vision of that increased transparency and accountability, and how do we do that together, can really drain out some of that acrimony and frustration. So we don't support ag-gag, and we hope that the government and all of industry will not support it, and will move towards answering the question, how do we actually work together and not work in a divided format? One of those ways is to move towards proactive measures and this idea of shared vision. I wanted to reflect on, with everyone about Bill C-84, the recent bill that passed through the House of Commons in 2019, which banned all forms of sexual assault on animals and also increased the offenses with regards to animal fighting. That is a moment that we can all look at. Industry, animal welfare sector, CVMA, government, we all came together through the National Farm Animal Care Council, and it took about a year for us to come to what could we all agree on with regards to advancing the Criminal Code of Canada. And this is, as you'll know if you've been around the sector a while, it's something that has been being called to be updated for about 25 years. And having those farm ag groups come together and have this conversation resulted in a letter to the Justice Minister supporting those two updates on bestiality and animal fighting from Humane Canada, from CVMA, and 13 agricultural groups, which was phenomenal. And that bill passed. And it was a win for all of us. And it was great that we could all work together and go, sometimes I talk about, let's all go hand in hand to Parliament Hill and ask for what we need. Along that lines, I very much support and agree with Renee's concepts around the change that we need farmers to make in order to make animal welfare advancements based on animal welfare science. We also need to support financially. So whether it's through increased pricing for consumers, or it's from government providing the funding to pay for those big changes, we support that, and we're happy to support that alongside our agricultural sector. And finally, in closing, negotiation. It's hard. We have to have the hard conversations. We have to stay at the table, and we will find our way through. So thank you very much for the opportunity to wrap this amazing session up. I look forward to questions, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And I hope the whole country realizes how fortunate Canada is to have you as the CEO of Humane Canada. A very thoughtful and far-sighted presentation. Rather than call for questions specifically for Barbara, what I'd like to do is open an open panel discussion. We have a number of questions directed at all the speakers that I'd like to just hold in abeyance for a moment and ask if any of the speakers have questions that they would like to ask of each other. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to turn things over to Megan Bergman and Gabriella, if you would chime in with questions directed at the entire panel or at some combination of speakers.
Sure. Thanks, David. We did get a question around kind of an understanding of what ag-gag means, and if there are other options we can suggest if we are referring to anti-farm trespass legislation. And so I think that certainly we could get perspectives both from the industry and Barb.
Could I suggest maybe Marina von Keyserlingk could give a quick review of the research that she has done on that, and then maybe over to Barb and Renee.
Thanks, David. Barb and I have had numbers of conversations about this. So we engaged in some research about a decade ago. I had a PhD student at the time that came from the US, and the ag-gag laws were sort of circulating through many of the states. And specifically what they were referring to was the some sort of legal framework that prevented the outflow of information from the farm. And it really spoke about trying to, I think the ag organizations were obviously very concerned about undercover videos and this whole issue of false pretenses where people would come in and want to be, become employees, then take videos and then release this information. And so we did a study where we actually put people into a online survey, and we started out by asking them, how confident are you that farm animals have a good life in the US? And there was a Likert scale. And then we gave them an information capsule. Half of them were told about hay. And we took this from Wikipedia. We just told them sort of that many farm animals eat hay. And then the other half were told about the ag-gag laws. We didn't use the word ag-gag. We just told them that this was implemented at that time, I think 9 of the US states, and also the state of Victoria in Australia had passed legislation that would prevent this outflow of information. So people that took video and released it without consent could be prosecuted. And then, so we told them about that. And then we asked them again, how confident are you that farm animals in the US have a good life? And essentially what we showed is that this eroded trust in agriculture big time. And essentially people were, I could make and when we asked all these demographics, I could make a sort of a very conservative meat-eating person react like a vegetarian, more liberal-minded person by simply telling them about the ag law. And I think it really comes down to, what else are you hiding?
Yeah.
And so this law, just for this law has been actually, or that research, which actually cited in some states in the U.S. as in judgments, pulling back on ag law.
Yeah. Thank you, Nina. And just to flag, sometimes laws like this are framed as anti-trespass, which is more understandable, or strengthening of trespass laws, but also include elements that are essentially anti-whistleblower. And in today's world, trying to clamp down on whistleblowers is a very suspicious thing to do. Barbara, would you like to comment, or Renee?
Thank you, Renee. Well, I think you and Nina have wrapped it up very beautifully. For us, ag is the anti-whistleblower legislation, and that we have trespass laws, and trespass laws can be strengthened or better enforced for sure, and no one should have to undergo the fear of trespass on their properties. But we do need to have the free flow of information coming from farms out into the public, particularly the anti-whistleblower part. If you're trying to enforce the law, in Canada, we have a reactive animal protection system. So animal protection officers cannot go on farm proactively. They have to wait until there's been a complaint. And if a law stems or prevents people from providing any information, providing any kind of complaint, then animals are at greater risk.
It's clear that whistleblowers shouldn't be removed completely. Let's say it this way. We should consider that alert is important. We must have a system of alert, and I will just link with somebody that Andrea has said. It happens that there is some problems, mental problems from the farmers, and if we don't have a system to be able to see these kind of situations, yes, the animal are hurt, but it can be also the humans that are eventually. So it's important that we have a system that is able to select or see these kind of situations.
Good.
Making sure that misinformation and proper information is well go through correctly.
Good. Thank you, Renee. Andrea, could I just get your opinion on this? So you have looked at the harmful effects that trespass and other sort of hate-mongering events have on producers. Absolutely. Do you see a balance here? Is there a way to stop those events from happening and yet not, as I think some states and perhaps one of our provinces have done, of putting an anti-whistleblower component at the same time? And unmute yourself.
I certainly think that those two things, my personal opinion is can and should likely be divided. Do I think somebody should gain access to someone's farm because they want to see what's going on in there? Absolutely not. I can't walk in the back of somebody's restaurant or walk into an old Navy factory or, whatever it might be, because I have concerns. So no, I think the people who work and live on farms should be able to live and work on farm without fear of somebody breaking and entering into their property. I think that's different from the anti-whistleblower. And again, I think that the big opposition to the whistleblowing comes from that extreme side where enough farmers have heard stories where somebody gains employment under false pretenses, goes in, captures the worst possible footage, and makes that available, right? So I think the hesitation and the resistance to that, again, is from the extreme side. I don't think it's, employees who have been working there who blow the whistle that is being met with the resistance. I think it's this ulterior motive of trying to degrade agriculture that's the issue.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's been said. At the same time, the event we had in British Columbia some years ago of very bad behavior on a dairy farm, a whistleblower reported this, and the dairy sector itself took steps to deal with it. So somehow we need to empower the sector to solve these problems, and they need information to do so. I don't know the solution, but we really have to find one. Any other comments on that before we ask Megan for another question? Okay, Megan.
Thanks, David. We do have one question in terms of the line between difficult discussions and threats is sometimes very narrow. Any idea how we can favor the discussion between stakeholders with very different visions and prevent that tension?
Maybe Barb and Renee could jump in on this one.
I will start by sharing what Barb has said at the beginning of her presentation. Vision is important. We have to make sure that before we start hard discussions, we must make sure that we have a common vision, or we must see where we want to go, what we want to achieve before we go in the difficult discussion. Difficult discussion will happen. It's not the point here. It's like any negotiation. However, it has to be balance, and it's a word that I have used many times in my presentation. It has to be balanced with the different other constraints that agriculture has. Otherwise, we will miss the point. So I'll let you continue, Barb.
It's a great question, and we're certainly not the only sectors who deal with that, as far as how do we keep on what we like to call humane discourse. As organizations that want to create a more humane world, then we have to engage in humane discourse. And what does that mean? And I would fall back to really basic facilitation skills, which is when you bring people around the table, agreeing on the rules of engagement. It's really simple, but sometimes we have to go back to our most basic transparency around process and facilitation. Just as simple as it is, here's our vision, here's our current reality, here's where we want to go. Now, how are we going to get there? How are the ways we want to interact with each other, talk to each other? And then, of course, critically in negotiations, what are we going to do when it gets hard? How are we going to disengage, re-engage? What are the steps to resolution? And let's agree on them before we get there, recognizing that we're likely going to get there. And so then it gives us something to fall back on. And having that facilitator, the independent facilitator who can actually focus on the health and welfare of the group, is really important as well. And so I think putting those steps in place will help when things get intense. And there's no doubt they will. We are all, from my experience, no matter which sector we're coming from, we're all passionately engaged in this conversation, and we all feel like we have a very important stake in it.
Wonderful, thank you. Any further comments before we ask Megan for another question? No.
I just wanted to follow up just a little bit. I think back to what I was trying to convey at the very beginning is I totally agree with what Renee and Barb were saying, but I do think what we need to, as individual industries, you need to really think about what your vision is and what the vision is 25 years from now. When we talk about the challenges we have today, emotion sets in right away. It's it's also important to try to push ourselves out in time, because then we can actually talk about some of these things that we may not necessarily agree upon today. it comes down to our values, and each industry needs to articulate its own values, and then we need to come together and bring in the different stakeholders. And, I think what Barb did really well was she actually gave us a list of sort of the vision of Humane Canada is. Each individual animal industry should go through that exercise, because then once we know what we want, then we can come to the discussion, then we can come together about where do we agree and what are the things that we don't agree upon, but not in a threatening way. We need to acknowledge that as an industry, we're all moving forward, and change is not bad.
Good.
Change is hard, but it also can be good.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nina. So I think we're seeing the role both of facilitation in the course of discussion, but also the role of leadership within the sectors to help a sector develop a long-term vision for the future. I have seen over many decades, sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. The leadership in the agricultural commodity sectors is so critical here. Megan, another question.
Sure, thanks, David. The One Health viewpoint seems very important and often overlooked in the discussion. Do you have suggestions for a regulator that wants to assist in improving the situation?
Anyone take that one up?
Can you repeat that, please, Megan?
Sure. The One Health viewpoint seems to be very important and is often overlooked in the discussion. Do you have suggestions for a regulator that wants to assist in improving the situation?
And I think what is probably intended is not just a One Health, but also a One Welfare perspective. What can we recommend to regulators to follow this advice of improving producer welfare in order to improve animal welfare?
I really like the programs that are involving a team approach and in connecting with farmer well-being, animal well-being, and the supports there. So like the one that I discussed in my presentation in Ireland, how the Irish SPCA, the veterinary, the producer groups, and physical health groups, the health system in general, how they're working together. And again, recognizing that we are we are one community, and so that producers, when they recognize that somebody is struggling, having that mental health literacy training to be able to recognize that somebody is struggling and to be able to have that conversation with them. So I think all of the players on this team need to have that basic mental health literacy, and knowing how to recognize signs, how to broach a conversation with somebody, how to bridge them to appropriate supports, to try and get the farmers the help that they might need right from the beginning. I think that would be one key piece.
Good, thank you, Andrea. Any other comments?
Yes, the mental health literacy, I think, is essential, and it's something that is not touched most of the time in the curriculum of students. And I think it's a failure. It has to be discussed, and not only in agriculture. It has to be discussed in a larger in a larger sense, so that everybody are aware and sensitive and remove their taboos around this question. This is one part. The other one is about the holistic approach. If we want to make sure that we have a more one welfare, one health approach, is to break silos. Traditionally, we have the human health and community on one side, animal health community on the other side, and then they work. They have to work together, and it's the only way we will have a coordinated discussion and a more holistic point of view.
Extremely good comments, thank you. Because we had the technical glitch, I should be closing up very soon, but because we had the technical glitch and it's such a rich opportunity for discussion, let's have another couple questions from Megan and Gabriella.
Sure. So David, we have another question coming in, and it ties into some comments that came in from both Renee and Barb. But if public trust requires production practices to meet evolving societal expectations, why should producers be compensated for certification? Should it not be a requirement to produce, especially when codes are generally the minimum standard of production?
Well, Barb, I'll let you start.
Well, I won't address the certification piece. I think, Renee, you might be better to address that part. What I was referring to was, for example, if we want to move to group housing from a confinement system on farm, then it is an enormous investment on behalf of that farmer. And so we have some different opportunities. We can wait until the farm has to naturally be replaced. The system has to be naturally replaced. That can take a long time. Sometimes the public isn't willing to wait. And so that's a place for government to step in and provide the funding for the farmer to switch over to the new group housing system much sooner. And that then meets the public needs. For our perspective, it meets the animal welfare needs. And then from the farmer's perspective, it meets their needs to stay in business, which is also important.
Good.
For the answer, I will. It will be the economist hat for a while. We must make sure that we do not create market failures. If there is other legislations that do not pose the same constraint to their producers, and we are competing on the same ground, we'll have a disadvantage, and that can be really detrimental to the not only to the producers or the sector, but also to the consumer. As I was saying during my presentation, if we don't take care of the financial part, we may lose a sector, and consumers will have to supply themselves from other countries who do not have these rules in place. So in fact, what will happen is that they will allow others to feed them without the rules that they have set for themselves. So it's just a matter of having a coherent market. And I'm not saying that every action requires a penny. However, we must make sure that we are working on equal footing when it's time for market competition.
Good. Andrea?
Yeah, I was wondering if I could ask a question on that, actually. I know that's really cheeky of me as a panelist sneaking in a question, but it's related. And I've only read a couple of studies, so I don't feel confident enough to have a well-informed opinion, but maybe Nina or Renee, maybe you can let me know. But I seem to recall reading studies where the public says, yeah, we want this, we want you to change this, we want you to do that. And then at the grocery store, they're making their choice based on the cheapest product. So what farmers will tell me is, I'm a business person. If you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, then I will do what you want. But when it comes down to it, they're going to pick up the cheapest package of cutlets or whatever it is they're buying. So, like, does somebody have perhaps a more informed opinion on that?
I see Nina.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that because I think about it a lot. So I hear that as well all the time. I was just in a webinar yesterday with 300 people from around the world, egg industry people, and that came back. So look, yeah, okay, we're willing to change once the consumer is willing to pay more. And consumer purchasing behaviors studies show exactly what you say, is that when the consumer goes into the grocery store, the majority of decisions are based on price. It makes total sense that it is. The 99% of the people that walk into a grocery store have no idea how we produce food. What they do know is what price is. And so, and when they go in, there's this myriad of labeling, and there's lots of work that shows that labeling is confusing. And so they go in and they base on what they know, which is price. However, if you talk to that person outside of the grocery store, they are no longer a consumer. They are now a citizen. And citizen brings to the table their values. It doesn't mean that they are in favor of, battery caged hens because it's cheap, that because they buy it. When you actually go look at those eggs, there's, for the most part, zero information about what that means. It just says eggs, and they're cheaper than the ones that are cage free versus free run versus free range. And what does all that mean? If agriculture waits for the consumer to pay before they change, what they're doing is putting the sustainability of their industry on the shoulders of an uninformed but super important client. And so then what happens, and this is what we saw happened in the United States, where you have these propositions, we call them referendums here, is in California, when Proposition 2 in 2008 came to the table, I can't remember how many signatures Humane Society of the United States had to have in order to put the proposition on the ballot. They got those signatures. And this proposition said, all animals shall be housed in such a way that they can fully extend their wings or limbs and turn around 360 degrees and not touch another animal or touch any housing. United Egg Producers put millions and millions of dollars into anti-Prop 2 advertising on mainstream TV, nighttime TV, saying, look, if you vote yes for that, you are going to, prices of eggs are going to go up in the United States. What happened is 68.5% of the population voted yes. Is it really unreasonable to ask that an animal can fully extend its wings and turn around in 360 degrees? Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that. Comes back to what Barb says about a reasonably good life. But is this how we want to make animal welfare laws? So we have to, as an industry, decide what that minimum standard is. And at the same time, we can't be scared to actually get information in making that. And so what does the public think? What does the thoughtful person think? What are those things that they just can't get behind? Then this is where science comes into play, because, for Rene to implement changes in his farm, he needs people like myself and other animal welfare scientists to be 20 years ahead of the discussion, because I can't do a scientific experiment overnight.
Good.
So it's all packaged into that. So, sorry, long-winded answer to.
Well, it's a good introduction to. You've touched points that are really important. I've done some of my research on this. So we have to distinguish between the private benefits and the public benefits. And when it's time to go on the shelf and choose a product, it's a consumer hat that people has. And they will take the product that will have private benefits. However, as citizen, they will look for public benefits. And it is where I believe we have to make a difference between the compensation from public versus the compensation from the consumer. When it's private benefits, the market will take care of itself. When it's public benefits, such as I want to make sure that the animals are raised properly, they are grazing, or this touch more on it's not on the health benefits that a consumer will get when they will eat food. It's different. It's on the sentiments that they have around the food that they eat. And this is consumers. This is citizen perspective. And this is hard to get a value out of the market for these kind of benefits. So I think we have to distinguish these two kinds of benefits to better understand how a consumer will behave on the marketplace.
Thank you all very much. Andrea, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to comment as well?
No, I just haven't muted myself yet.
Perfect. Thank you. Sensitive to time, we have two things that we have to add today. One is I took the liberty of asking Jackie Weprock, the general manager of the National Farm Animal Care Council, to listen to all this and make give us some final thoughts. Before I do that, I wanted to ask Megan and Gabriella and the panelists if there's anything else that it would just be a tragedy to not touch on before we close. Nina.
Just one sentence, because I meant to bring this up in my talk, is at least from the public attitude work that we have done, and I guess I see this as a positive thing, is the general thoughtful person on the street doesn't expect agriculture to absolutely turn everything upside down overnight. What they expect, though, is that agriculture try to get better every day and be transparent about that. And those are two very different things.
Yeah. Good, good. Anything else?
I have just one thing to say, David. When you say what would be the tragedy if we didn't mention it, and maybe Jackie's going to mention this now, but the tragedy would be that we didn't have a path forward into this vision. How are we going to have that discussion so that we can set the next 20 or 30 years?
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, panelists. Clearly we have enough brain power and enough issues here to go for the rest of the day, but our audience might not tolerate that. So I'm going to ask Jackie Weprock, the General Manager of the National Farm Animal Care Council, to give us a few integrative comments.
All right, and just on cue, my webcam started to act up. So we'll see how it goes. I might look a little funky to you all, but hopefully I don't lose you. All right, so just, one of my favorite ways to spend the day is to listen to articulate, thoughtful people speaking. So I hope you all enjoyed those presentations as much as I did. I was asked to synthesize the key messages that were delivered through each of the presentations, and there's so much to unpack, a lot of really good information. So hopefully some of the key stuff I pulled out resonates with everyone who's been listening in and with the panel themselves. I sketched out some of the key words that I think really knit together the presentations, were expressed outright or implied. Words like compassion, conversation, collaboration, transparency, trust, and leadership. So from Andrea's presentation, the importance of compassion and seeing the person behind our ire is very clear. We need to act compassionately, even when we are at our most outraged. Words matter, and if our aim is to support good animal welfare, then we can only do this by supporting the people that are responsible for their care. And as Renee noted, there are many demands from society, and these demands can be challenging to accommodate or even contradictory, notably between animal welfare and the environment. So when we're each tempted to be less than compassionate in our choice of words, we also need to consider that our actions are also speaking to the broader community. So each of us is a representative of our constituent group. Our words and our actions contribute to the story, the generalizations or the characterizations of our own constituent groups. So if we want to be seen as broadly professional and trustworthy and credible, how we conduct ourselves really matters, notably on social media. However, just so that we're not too virtuous or virtue signaling, we need to recognize that we're all fallible. And so we need to forgive each other, and we need to forgive ourselves when we sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes that send button gets hit and you wish you could take it back. Another key message was on the need for conversation and collaboration on a common vision for animal welfare that keeps the animal front and center. Everyone recognizes that these conversations are uncomfortable, but are necessary. We do need to temper our emotional response and support forums. I'm happy to say support forums like NFAHW and the National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council, where people can come together and envision that bigger picture, conceive of a different way of doing things, and focus on the future. So right now, yes, we are in a more challenging trust environment, as Barb noted, but we can loop back to the notion, if we can loop back to that notion of compassion, I think we can find our way through. One further point I'd like to make on a common vision for animal welfare is while we're using similar words, I'm not sure that we're on the same page quite yet. It's going to be really important to tease apart the meaning of the words we're using to describe our vision for animal welfare. What do they mean at their core to different groups? And they could mean different things to different groups of people. And we might not even agree on the edges of some of those definitions, but is there enough commonality at the core that we can build and maintain the necessary trust to keep working together? I think there is, but I think it's important to have those, to tease those words apart as well and what we mean. And the need for transparency and trust go hand in hand in my mind. So in order to open up the barn doors, be more transparent, there needs to be trust that that information is not going to be misused. And on the other hand, there also needs to be trust that what is being revealed is real and not just for public relations. So transparency can help build consumer confidence in agriculture. I think we also are seeing that it can be a double-edged sword. So what happens when transparency reveals new public concerns, as Nina's presentation showed us? So rather than detracting from engaging in transparency, as Nina also noted, we should instead view these moments as the opportunity to develop that vision for the future. However, we do need to acknowledge that there's still a rub with transparency when concerns are revealed or perceived to exist, when there's not a clear path forward to resolving them, and when the lack of a resolution to an issue is seized upon to vilify. It's going to remain challenging to ask farmers to be transparent in a climate of vilification and limited support. So in conclusion, everyone attending this forum has a leadership role within their constituent group. In our pre-forum preparations, we had some great conversations amongst the panel, and we were trying to figure out what's that key message we want everybody to walk away with. We've ourselves, probably with my help, went down a few rabbit holes and drilled down into some of our own stories of why we felt the way we did about particular issues. And we drilled down into those specific situations, and everyone had a yeah but to each other's stories. And what we realized, I think, was that we really needed to rise above that, and the yeah buts don't solve the issues. So hence the call to action, I think, from this panel, as I see it, is for every one of us as leaders to take to heart and to act on the need for more compassion, better conversations, collaboration, transparency, and trust as individuals. So embracing that as individuals, and then from setting that example ourselves, we also need to encourage the same from our own constituents as well. So that's what I took away from this awesome group of speakers, and I hope that was a summary that was worthwhile and resonates for those who were listening as well. Thanks.
That was seriously impressive, Jackie.
Indeed. Wonderful summary, Jackie, clearly coming from the viewpoint of a person who has walked this walk for a very long time and seen all the hurdles and stones and bypaths. So thank you so much. Folks, I think in our topic of animal welfare, a vision for the future, I think what we've heard is that we need a shared vision, shared by producers, consumers, citizens, veterinarians, regulators, and others. It needs to be a long-term vision, not simply responding to the immediate issues of the day. It needs to be a vision that includes human welfare, not simply as an add-on, but as integral and indispensable to animal welfare. And it needs to be a vision that takes everyday realities, such as economic constraints and international trade, into account, so that our vision is not simply made impossible by external features. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for wonderful presentations and a very vigorous discussion. It only remains for me to thank also our sponsors, Metacam, the sponsor for our session, the gold sponsors of our forum, which are the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Public Health Agency of Canada, and Farm Credit Canada, silver sponsor, Egg Farmers of Canada, and our bronze sponsors, Canadian Health, Animal Health Institute, Chicken Farmers of Canada, the Registered Veterinary Technologists and Technicians of Canada, Agrilytics, and the National Sheep Network. And our thanks to all of you for being part of this wonderful and stimulating event. Thank you.